Chapter 14, Monday, July 17th. As the day wore on, Luke watched the bow of the Phoenix sink lower and lower into the sea. At least a dozen times he was tempted to send the pumpers forward to try even out the schooner's balance. No, if they had a chance, it was with the motor. They had to pump out the engine room first. It was an agonizing decision. If they took a nosedive to the bottom, it would be all his fault. Even in a glassy calm, sleepy waves broke over the gunwale. The water puddled for only a moment before rolling down a deck that was sloped like a parking ramp. If another storm blew through, the Phoenix wouldn't last 5 minutes. In the crew cabins, even the upper bunks were swamped now. Where the crew members were supposed to sleep was anybody's guess. Probably they just wouldn't sleep anymore. Luke thought back to the night before, crammed next to JJ in the narrow berth. That misery might go down as his final night of sleep ever. The thought coaxed a nervous chuckle from him. Beneath the surface lingered a feeling so awful he didn't dare dwell on it. By 5 o'clock, the entire engine was spread across two beach towels in the stern. Will surveyed the scene with a frown. I hope you can look at this stuff and see a motor, because all I see is a huge pile of junk. Lissa looked preoccupied. I've got it straight in my mind. Don't bug me. It took another hour to get the last few inches of thick, murky slime off the floor of the engine room. Then Lissa eased herself down the hatch to start the long task of reassembly. The pumpers rushed forward to work on the crew cabins and the focals, the area below decks, directly under the bow. They were exhausted, but there was no time for a break. As Luke put it, their next break could be spent on the ocean floor. The sun was setting when Will stepped into the cockpit and joined Luke at the wheel. He checked their direction. Still west-southwest. How do we know that's right? He asked uneasily. Maybe the compass is broken, like everything else on this tub. Luke shrugged. You can't be off course when you don't know where you're going in the first place. He regarded the foresail. Wind's picking up. We should probably let out the sheet a little. Will groaned. If you're turning into a real sailor, I'm going to have to start treating you like Radford. Luke shot Will a look. Don't mention that name, not even as a joke. Will shook his head. How could anybody do what he did? I mean, we're talking about dying here. Are we so worthless to him? Luke looked at him sharply. We're not worthless. Ratface is worthless. If there's any justice in this world, he'll get his. Unless, Will frowned, you don't think JJ could be right, that all this is part of a CNC thing. It's pretty crazy, said Luke. They'd have to trash their own boat, wash the captain into the sea on purpose. Anything's possible, I guess. I'd love to believe that the captain's okay. Me too, Will agreed fervently. That's probably what's in JJ's head. He feels responsible. He is responsible, Luke said flatly. He was born with a dream life. He gets whatever he wants whenever he wants it. And he's still the biggest screw up I've ever met. Lissa heaved herself through the engine room hatch, dusting ineffectually at the caked muck on her knees. Will looked at his sister anxiously, but couldn't read her expression. Tell me it's good news. It's back together, she replied. That's all I know for sure. The captain said never to start the engine without the blower, Luke reminded her. The blower's electric, Lissa explained. If we run it before the engine's on, we could drain the battery charge. English, Liz, Will interrupted impatiently. We're going to have to improvise. She picked up the grease-spattered beach towel that had been used to dry off the engine parts and tossed one to Luke and one to Will. When I give the word, you guys stand over the hatch and fan like crazy. Luke was amazed. And that's safe? She knows this stuff, Will said fervently. She got an A on that science project. Lissa replaced Luke at the wheel and waited for the two boys to establish themselves above the hatch. Okay, now! Like palace guards fanning the Sultan, Luke and Will began waving their towels up and down, ventilating the engine room. Lissa hit the starter button. The motor turned over, choked once, and died. Will cursed and threw his towel to the deck. Don't stop, she ordered briskly. Then they resumed fanning. She tried again. This time the engine putted itself to life. All right, Liz, shouted Will. His sister looked at him sharply, but found no sarcasm in her praise. Cheering and applause came from the pumpers around the crew cabins. Charla flashed them a thumbs up from her spot atop the foremast. Okay, exclaimed Luke. Put her in gear. Lissa pushed forward on the throttle. The motor coughed and sputtered out. Aw, man, moaned Will. So the whole process began again. Luke and Will fanned while Lissa tried to nurse the starter again along. It's not easy, you know, Will protested as the motor roared to life once again, only to die with a wheeze and a hiccup of machinery. It's murder on your shoulders. You're such a crab, Lissa sneered. Luke rolled his eyes. What was with these two? They were on a sinking boat. This could be their last conversation. Why did it have to be fighting words? As they continued to work and bicker, Luke noticed an alarm that roared off the motor was becoming less and less frequent. After a few more minutes, the engine wouldn't even turn over. Will was worried too. Oh, Liz, I knew you'd bust it. Probably just flooded the carburetor, said Lissa, grabbing the toolbox. I can smell the gas. Once again, she lowered herself into the engine hatch. What's the problem? Charla called. Luke could only shrug. You should come down. It's getting dark. Give me another half hour, came the reply. I can still see a little. After a few minutes, Lissa emerged, reeking of the fuel. I think I got it this time. She climbed into the cockpit and reached for the starter. Luke and Will resumed fanning. My arms are falling off, Will complained. He only let go for a second to rest his aching shoulders. But at that moment, a gust of wind snatched the greasy terry cloth from his other hand. The towel spread open like a full sail and floated slowly down over the engine hatch. Hey, wait! Will began, but Lissa's oil-stained fingers was already pressing the button. A spark from the starter engine ignited the trapped fumes in the engine room. It made a whoom like the lighting of a propane barbecue, only a lot louder. This was followed by a split-second pause as the fire shot up the fuel lines to the Phoenix's 90-gallon gas tanks. Get down! Howled Lissa, hurling herself to the deck of the cockpit. A mammoth explosion rocked the schooner, and for a moment, dusk was bright as day. Suddenly, the main cabin and galley were gone, replaced by a pillar of flame. The force of the blast threw Luke, Will, and Lissa over the transom clear into the sea. Luke tasted salt water for a moment and then resurfaced into the burning hailstorm. Bits of cabin, deck, and galley, all on fire, pelted down on him, forcing him to dive. The blazing cook stove of the Phoenix hit the waves right where he had been a split second before. On the foredeck, the wave knocked JJ and Ian off their feet. When they recovered, they found themselves facing a wall of fire that engulfed 2/3 of the boat. The extinguishers, cried Ian, reaching down the companionway and yanking the small tank from its mounting on the bulkhead. He pulled the pin and sprayed foam at the blaze. JJ picked up a bucket and began bailing water from the cabin and sloshing it into the firestorm. The heat was unbearable. They stumbled on the ruined deck, which was tangled of twisted planks and splinters. It's no use, bawled JJ. We might as well be throwing Dixie cups of Kool-Aid. The blast had knocked Charla out of her post atop the foremast, landing her upside down in the ratlines. It took every ounce of her gymnastics training to right herself again. Through the waves of heat and smoke that billowed over her, she spotted JJ and Ian. But when she looked aft, she saw only the boiling orange of the blaze. Where are the others? She called down. In the stern, shouted Ian. There is no stern. It's all fire back there. With a terrible creaking sound, the flaming stump of the man mast toppled over in a shower of sparks. It crushed the cabin top, cutting the younger boy off from JJ. Ian! JJ cried. Ian jumped back, stumbling on an upended deckboard. The extinguisher dropped from his hands, rolled into the fire, and exploded in a whoosh of compressed gas. The blazing mainmast ignited the foresail. JJ sloshed water into the smoldering sail, but flames quickly licked up the canvas, forcing Charla back atop the mast. The fire soon spread to the sheets and the rigging. Ian, can you hear me? Called JJ. Get out of there, came Ian's voice from the inferno. JJ spun around. To where? There were only two choices: either stay on the burning boat or take his chances in the vast, inhospitable, and terrifying sea.